Welcome to my tabletop chat. Again, I've not done one of these in such a very, very, very long time. Thank you so much for watching. More people are watching these than I ever thought they would, so that's really exciting. I am getting pretty close to being able to monetize my YouTube channel, so closer than I ever thought I would be. So, you know, people always ask for certain things like or subscribe or whatever. My request is that even if you don't want to watch this, if you like my content, just play it in the background, because if I triple the amount of watch hours I have on my channel, because you need 3,000 hours in a year and I'm at like 1,000. So the more people watch to the end or just let it run, listen to my soothing voice, the closer it is that I can maybe make $5 a month or something, which would be great. So anyway, moving on. I have lots of projects that I've worked on that I'm really excited to talk about. Obviously, it's been a while, so I've done a lot more than this. We have a drill, because I'm going to do a little tutorial, because I figured out that I actually really like using this as a shuttle. Crazy. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And also, I want to talk about my theories and philosophies about using drafts to create patterns and to learn to read structures, which I will talk about as well. It's very easy for me to get onto tangents. I've had a lot of coffee and I'm really, really, really excited about so many things. So I'll try to keep myself contained. Okay, so first off, I'm still dyeing warps. I was trying to sell these on my website. People don't buy them, that's fine, because I can make them and then just weave them. So I have a sale coming up in April for Gathering of the Guilds. Selling has been really tricky. I'm sure you all are very well aware that the economy right now is a little bit tricky and people don't really want to spend a lot of money on things. So I've had a couple of sales where nothing has sold, which is so defeating. But I had a pretty good one over Christmas, and I'm doing this one. This will be my first time doing a large multi-day sale over in a huge event. So I'll get to see how that works. I think I'm learning that the reality of being a thing maker in the weaving sphere is quite tricky, and I'm not sure if I am built for it, but whatever. I weave all the time. At some point in time, things pile up and I have to get rid of them, and I always learn something new. So I am going to be weaving up a lot of my dyed warps. That's why I have the weft yarn out and my stick. Let's again talk about this a little bit. Let's go through the weaving first, and then we'll talk about what I learned about using this as a shuttle. Okay. I was really lucky and was able to sell a couple of patterns to Gist. This is one of them. This one's called Deflected Reflections. It's made with 2 Heddles. When I was making this, see how the one side is different than the other side? When I was designing this and weaving the samples, I messed up on my measurements and I ran out of warp, and I had to be like, tail between my legs, be like, can I get some more product? I like very quickly ordered some new stuff, and luckily they gave me like a week. They're so nice to work with. But so this is one of the patterns that I made. This is my second attempt, and luckily it worked out really, really well. The mouth on this one was very confusing for me. And then this one, which I call the Bridgetown scarf, is a deflected double weave scarf. So you might know that I have a deflected double weave pattern on my website. This is just another version of that you can get through Gist. What's great about the Gist patterns is that they have been actually edited. And so the pattern directions might be a little bit more clear than on mine. Well, actually, I like my patterns, whatever. I do a good job. There's also a video showing the lift sequence that's in my YouTube channel too. It's just a little different, but yeah, so excited to have that opportunity to make these patterns for them. And so that was my big exciting thing that happened to me in February. I also want to show you this, I think. Maybe we'll do this one. I was going to submit yardage for the Handweaving Guild of America's yardage display. I think it's time for rigid Heddle weavers to start making yardage and getting them out in front of people so people could see all the amazing things you can do on a rigid Heddle loom. So I designed this whole project. It's a 3-shaft twill, and let's see if I could show it to you here. There's just a lot going on. I had this idea. I started posting this on my TikTok. I'm on TikTok now. So I'll have to do another thing kind of showing the final result of the fabric. So this is 4 yards worth. I've got 2 painted warps. I have this rainbow one, which was what I made for my warp dyeing class, my warp painting class, that's over at the Handweaving Academy. And then the middle section is also dyed with this blue and white. And this blue, I actually mixed this color using Tien's, she has like all these dye samples that she did. I was able to find this color. I really liked it. And then I pulled the formula out and mixed it and then dyed my my yarn, and it turned out the color I wanted, which was so exciting. So that is like a new part of my world too. Maybe we could do a video on that later on. I don't know. But at any rate, so this is the fabric that I made. It's not quite, like I still have to go through and fix some issues. But once I got it done, I realized like I'm not super proud of it. It was a really fun experiment to try to get yardage woven in just a couple of weeks. I think I spent 2 weeks on this. And like the experience was really good. The final project, I don't feel like it's my best work. It doesn't really hit all, the 5 qualities I like. And I don't know what to do with it. But I think, it sounds really sad that I spent all this time weaving this, but I didn't put any money into it. I mean, I did a while ago when I bought all the supplies. But I didn't buy anything new. I basically went through my studio and was just like, okay, what do I want to clean out? I've got these warps. I have this stuff. Okay, let's put it on my loom and let's weave it. But there's just something about it that's not, it's not making me super happy. So what I decided to do is, I started experimenting a little bit. Oh boy, let's see if I could find it. So like I was like, well, what if I bleach stars into parts of it? And I was like, okay, that looks kind of silly. And I tried to put some, it doesn't show up at all, some like kind of dyes and paints on it on one end just to see if I could do anything to it. And I decided that I am going to go ahead and over dye it. And maybe once it has like an over dye on it that's unifying the full piece, it will feel a little bit more cohesive. So that's the next step. And then I got to figure out what to do with it because it's actually enough to make something. Like I could make, I'm thinking I want to make a skirt. I've been wearing more skirts lately. So hopefully if I could get it a color that I like, I can make a skirt out of it and we'll just see what that journey looks like. So that was 2 solid weeks. I've also been experimenting more. This is using the painted warps that I do. But I've been kind of experimenting with this bright pink. This one isn't done yet. It still needs to be wet finished, and I have to finish the fringe on it. But I have one of my closest friends recently died. She died last week, which was really, really hard. And I spent a lot of time with her as she was dying, and I would just hold her, rub her feet, just trying to bring her any comfort. She was really uncomfortable. Cancer is really a terrible way of dying. I didn't realize that. My eyes are very open now, and I'm like, oh, I know what this is like. And if you are experiencing it or know somebody is experiencing it, I don't know, lots of condolences. It's not easy. So I know that sounds really, really heavy. But anyway, I was weaving during this process, and I would almost like look at her, and I would just feel these images would come into my head. So I started weaving them. And I don't know. There's just something like, I just felt like everything around her was kind of sparky and sparkly. It was very, very strange. I had never been around somebody who was dying before. And it was really, really, it was interesting, you know? So anyway, so I wove this, which I don't know. I like it a lot. There's some things I need to fix with it, but it was definitely something I put on my loom. People were like, you can't put those colors together. And I was like, I want to. And I did. And we'll put it out there and we'll see if anybody else feels touched by it. I don't know. It was a fun process. Okay, well, not super fun. I mean, yeah. Anyway, and the last piece I want to show you is something that I'm immensely proud of. This is a silk warp twill. It's 3-shaft. I think it's about 18 EPI. And the warp is a hand-painted silk, which is so luxurious and soft and kind of heavy and warm, which is really cool. And then the weft is this, I dyed it kind of a dark gray, but it is a baby alpaca linen and silk blend. Like, oh, it's like luxury and luxury and luxury and luxury. It's like almost like gilding the lily. It's so crazy, but it's so soft, and it's one of my favorite yarns. I get it from Wool to Die For. It's where I get all my product from, because it's for knitters, but then they also have sizes that work really good on the rigid Heddle. Like, this is a heavy, heavy, heavy silk. It's hard to find it at places that sell silk for weaving. But at any rate, I love this thing. It's my favorite. I've been wearing it all winter. So yeah, and I love the colors. This is, if I were to say that I had a color style, I would definitely say that this is it. So it's so nice to hit it. So this is something I like. This is something I'm like, didn't quite work. I'm wondering, can I get this to be more like this? Wish me luck. Wish me luck. Okay, so that is the work I've recently done. Lots of fun with 3-shaft twills. I feel like I have really explored the 3-shaft twill territory quite a bit. But what I wanted to do was talk about this next, because today I'm going to put this on my loom. I love short warps because you just mess with them. You know, they don't get over tangled. It's just this little nugget of goodness. But anyway, when I did this piece right here, I used these dowels to hold my weft. And it's something that I saw. It's something that's pretty common with backstrap loom weavers, where they will just wrap the edge of a stick with their yarn, and they might have 3 or 4 different sticks with different colors, and the yarn is just sort of wrapped on the edge. And I was like, I really, really like it. I like that concept, because as much as I like the regular shuttles, those work just fine. And I like boat shuttles, but my issue with the boat shuttles is that they don't hold a lot of yarn. You can't really put this in a boat shuttle. It doesn't work very well. You'll be changing out your yarn like every 3 inches, right? The other issue with the boat shuttle is sometimes it dives down. Like, we can't put a shuttle race on a rigid Heddle, and the shuttle race is something that you put on a loom, like a jack loom, so that way your shuttle just glides over. It's like a piece of wood that sits underneath your warp, and then your shuttle just slides over it, and you don't have to worry about it diving down. We can't have one of those on a rigid heddle, obviously, and sometimes our threads can be a little slack, like especially the slot threads can be a little slack. So it's, I don't know, I have mixed feelings about using a shuttle on the rigid heddle. I like it with higher EPI projects, like if I'm doing something that's 20, 25 EPI and not super wide, they work really well. And the best part about the shuttle is that I think it's easier to maintain good selvages. I have a really hard time with selvages and my stick shuttle because you're kind of just finagling it a little bit more. So this concept kind of puts both of those things together. I could have this be as wide as my project, so I'm not trying to throw it. And I could put a lot of yarn on it, and it just kind of easily untwists off. It's a little bit like a pern, which is something that rigid heddle weavers don't really use very often. It's a very specific kind of shuttle that uses a pern. Perns are cone shaped, and then when you put the yarn on, you put it on in such a way that it just kind of flows up from the top, right? You just hold it and goes and just comes off, and the pern itself doesn't move. In order to use the drill successfully, what I learned is you need to have a fair amount of tension on your thread as you wind it onto the bobbin. This obviously is a dowel, but the same concept applies, right? If I were using a bobbin, I would attach it to my drill either by having like a little stick hold it. I use chopsticks a lot of times. I put the chopstick in here and put my bobbin on it. But there's different ways of doing it. So anyway, so we got it on. So what's going to happen when I weave with my dowel is I'm leading with this side. So this is the side that goes into my shed. That means I need my yarn to just unwrap from this way. So I want to pull it this way as I weave. So in order to do that, I need to wind it using my drill in such a way that I have more thread down here, and then it goes like I start here and it gets fat, and then it gets thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner as it goes down. So I'm starting in the middle of my dowel. And I'm holding this with a good amount of tension. You got to make sure that it doesn't burn your fingers. Whoa, geez. So it's burning my fingers. So I hope you could see that. I'm starting to build a little bulge right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of move it back and forth to here till it builds up, and then I move it over a little bit, and then it builds up, then I move it a little over. We go boop, 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 and we'll just keep doing that. I think that is pretty close. Let me take it off here. So this is pretty imperfect. I tried to have it be a little bit fatter down here, but I also don't want it to be too fat because it's going to go through my shed. But see how it just unwraps? It's pretty cool, right? That's awesome. So that way I'm not like, you know, taking my shuttle and I'm unwrapping the yarn after every single, you know, pick. But yeah, this has been kind of my favorite way of weaving lately. And now I'm wondering if I can maybe take a knife and whittle this down and have a flatter, a more pointy edge, and then maybe I could use it for pickup. Yeah, lots of different ideas. So I just wanted to share that with you because also this is so cheap. Dowels are so cheap. They're just a couple of bucks. And, you know, I didn't go through a whole lot of my yarn, but I went through a fair amount. And if my drill didn't die, I could have put on quite a bit more onto here too. So that is that. Okay, cool. Thanks for going on that journey with me. Okay, so I think that is almost everything I wanted to talk about. thanks for looking at my stuff. It's really fun to have somebody to do show and tell with. And I hope that you try using a dowel as a shuttle. Let me know how it goes. The other thing I think we have to talk about is, drafts. I'm just going to talk just for a little bit more, and then I'm going to go to the computer and we are going to start talking about drafts, and we'll identify the different parts of a draft, and then I'll go into how I use weaving drafts to symbolize pickup sticks. So very, very exciting. Hopefully not too confusing. So first off, what is a draft, right? This is a book, The Handweaver's Pattern Directory. So this is 600 structures in this very beautiful, concise book. Just writing out this pattern, I think, is like 3 solid pages of instructions. So clearly there is a benefit to having this shortcut system that works to describe. It actually is the shortcut way of expressing a weaving structure. So up here you have your threading, which basically what thread goes into what heddle. And this would be your treadling, which would be which treadle to push. And then this is your tie-up. The tie-up will show you when you push down one treadle, which ones of these shafts should go up. And then it doesn't show right here, it's actually showing you the actual fabric. It's not showing you the gridded out version, but the gridded out version is basically sort of like a preview of what that structure should look like if it's, perfectly perpendicular to each other. Of course, as we know, threads have a tendency to deflect or move around. So this is going to look a lot different as a draft than it is on the page. Same thing with this. This is honeycomb. Honeycomb moves around a lot. If you saw this as a draft, it'd be very, very straight. But at any rate, the advantages of using drafts is that you can use them on a computer with weaving software that already exists. And once you have played with it in that area or whatever, if you know how to translate it to your rigid Heddle loom, you have a rigid Heddle pattern and you have a shaft loom pattern. So when I was making this pattern right here, I actually drafted this out so I could play with the colors and things like that, and also hopefully do some of the math and see how these color transitions would maybe look. And then I was able to send that to Christina at Gist. It was like, this is what I want to make. And she looked at it and approved it and said, that looks great. So we had this basis of communication that we can both visually see and both work from, even though we both maybe are working with different kinds of looms. So what I'm finding as I write more and more patterns is that rigid Heddle weavers don't have the benefit of such an easy system. And it makes it really hard without the language. It makes it very hard to communicate what you're trying to do. And every pattern I write, I have to spend so much time figuring out how to communicate that pattern, and every weaver has to figure out what I'm trying to say. And that extra amount of work for us sort of bogs down our creativity. It's very, very onerous. And I'm not sure if really the right answer is to have every rigid Heddle weaver learn to use a draft and then take that draft and adapt it to the loom. I'm not sure. But for me, it's been really, really helpful. And it's also helpful too, because sometimes when I look at a draft, I'll recognize the pattern. I'll be like, oh yeah, I could actually do that on 2 heddles. I don't need to do that on 4. Or I might be like, oh, I could do that on 2 heddles with 2 pickup sticks. Like I can read it and sort of interpret that information, but that has taken me such a long time. And I'm not sure how many rigid Heddle weavers are gonna wanna go on that journey. I just have found it to be the amount of effort that I put into learning how these drafts work it has yielded many, many fruits. Like it's been good labor. It's been productive. I don't feel like it's time that I've wasted. So that's why I'm doing this particular video. Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's boring. I don't know. We'll take it slowly. We'll just go one step at a time and let's see if we can make it happen. Oh, I also have another thing to say too, is I am not against other systems, just to be clear. I know that there are different people working on this problem in different ways, and I think in the end it will all shake out. We'll end up with the best system that we could possibly have as long as there's enough people who are trying to make it work. So I'm not saying that this is better than another kind of draft system or another communication system. It's just one that I happen to really, really like. And I want to put the information out there for you. So, but use whatever works. If you like diagrams, then please use diagrams. I think diagramming, where you have like the little holes and then it shows how the threads are going through each hole or each slot and each heddle. I think that that's part of our lives forever. I don't think that rigid heddle weavers will ever be able to leave that. But I do find that interpretation for me goes well with also having a draft next to it, because then I sometimes will look at those and be like, is that how I would want to thread it? Maybe I might want to switch this around a little bit. And if I actually have the draft, I could figure out how I would want to switch it so it works better for me, which is not, I don't know. I think that that's great. So anyway, I will see you in a bit. I'll be over at the computer, and thanks so much for hanging out with me. So much fun. Okay, bye. So first, I want to apologize for any background noise you hear. Hopefully my voice will still be clear. I have a hard time whenever I'm running the screen recorder. It tends to make my computer fan turn on, and sometimes you could hear that go on and on in the background. I am going to talk about drafts using this amazing resource called handweaving.net. Handweaving.net is a collection of historic drafts and drafts that are submitted by the weaving community for use for free or with the cost of the subscription, which is very affordable. I think it's under like $30 a year. There's also a lot of documents of weaving and textile and lace related topics. So a lot of historic documents that are no longer under copyright are here. So there's so much stuff. If you're into fiber at all, not just weaving, there's a lot of things, a lot of little nuggets that are hidden in there. I basically am looking at the most popular drafts, and I set these parameters of 4 shafts and any amount of treadles, any float size. If that doesn't make sense to you, that's okay. And you can see here I have a large collection of a huge variety of drafts to look at. So what is a draft? A draft is essentially a shorthand notation that communicates visually the structure of your weaving. You could see here just with the parameters of 4 shafts with 4 different shed variations, just the absolute mind-boggling number of structures you can make. As you add more shafts and as you add more treadles or shed combinations, you get even more, exponentially more options. So how does this relate to the rigid heddle? Because we don't necessarily have drafts that we work with. I think that the answer is it's up to us. So you can decide to work with drafts. You could decide to not work with drafts. I have chosen to work with drafts because I feel like if I learn this system, I could take that knowledge to any loom that I'm going to touch, whether it's a rigid heddle or a backstrap loom or a shaft loom. So that's why I spent quite a bit of time learning about drafts and learning the way that they work. What we are going to do next is I'm going to find sort of a more simple, I was hoping for kind of a plain weave or a straight draw twill. Let me go ahead and pull this one up. Okay, so this one I'm selecting simply because it's a straight draw. What a straight draw is you're basically threading your heddles in order. So in order to talk about your heddles, let's start talking about the parts of the draft. Another reason why I am doing this from handweaving.net is that this is a very affordable way for you to have access to a computerized draft editor. There are many different kinds of draft editors. I use iWeave quite often on my phone. There's also Fireworks? Oh my gosh, I forgot the name of it. I don't really use that one so much, but depending on the kind of loom you have, that will determine how much money you really want to invest in a drafting program or drafting software. So once again, this is very, very affordable, and it's a great way to start playing with drafts. So I've selected this draft. I'm going to go over into my tools, and I'm going to go to the draft editor. So Chris has done a really good, amazing job of creating this internal system so you could take any draft on handweaving.net, bring it up right within the program, and start playing with it. So let's start talking about the parts of a draft. I know that they can look very confusing. There's all these grids and all these little black dots, and it's hard to know exactly what they mean. But really, all it's telling you is which warp thread is being lifted and which warp threads are staying low, and the direction of your weft. So it will determine when you see the weft or when you see the warp. There's only two options. You either see this peach color or you see this blue color. That's it. That's all it's really telling you. What it is also doing is it's telling you how to program your loom to execute something that will look like this. What a draft can tell you is basically the path of every weft thread through its warp. A draft cannot tell you how the fabric will drape, what the texture of the fabric, the sheen of your yarn, and some drafts will have lots of floats. That's when a warp or weft thread will go over multiple other warp and weft threads, and that could end up doing something called deflection, where it will kind of curve. And a draft is not going to show you that. A draft is always at these direct right angles, and it's showing you a very rigid view of your final cloth. So depending on the kinds of fabric that you want to make, drafts are great for communicating how to do it. They're very great for testing out colors, and then if you do have a kind of draft that's going where the threads are going to be staying stable, it will show you more or less what that fabric is going to look like. So I'm going to identify some of the parts of the draft. This part right here is the colors. So if I change the colors here, it's going to show up on my drawdown. This area right here tells me how many shafts my loom needs in order to execute this draft. This part right here is called a tie-up. The tie-up is essentially, the way I see it, is a collection of your sheds. So the tie-up is telling you which shafts are tied to which treadle. And this right here is your treadling. So this tells you which treadle to push to raise which shafts before you pass your weft pick. So it's a lot, but we'll take it one step at a time. And then we'll talk about how this relates to the rigid heddle. Okay, so this is for a 4-shaft loom. How can I tell? I can tell it's for a 4-shaft loom because this grid has 4 rows. So this is row 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each row corresponds with a shaft on my loom. And each one of these black dots is telling me which shaft to thread, which heddle and which shaft to thread. So this right here, this little black dot, is on shaft 1. It always starts from the bottom and moves up if your shaft part or your threading is up on the top of the drawdown. Sometimes it could be in different places, but this is a pretty standard configuration if you're in the US and you're working with modern weaving publications. So this is just the example I'm going to show, but just know that sometimes they are a little different. Sometimes this is down here, but it's not as common to see. So Anyway, this little black dot here means that you thread shaft 1. So I'm going through a heddle in my first shaft. This one I'm going through a heddle in my second shaft. This one I'm going through a heddle in my third shaft, and this one I'm going through a heddle in my fourth shaft. And if I continue to do that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, I get what is called a straight draw. That's just sort of the colloquial term for this kind of threading. So it's a very, very common threading on a shafted loom. So that is the threading. And then obviously up here I've got the colors, and so I'm doing that threading all in pink. So that's how, or that peachy color. So that's how I'm going to kind of program my loom to run this sequence. So next we have this area right here. This is called your tie-up. The tie-up tells the weaver which shafts, 1, 2, 3, 4, these shafts right here, are going to get tied to which treadle. So similarly to how this started at the bottom and went to the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, this starts from the inside and goes to the outside. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is treadle 1, treadle 2, treadle 3, treadle 4. So treadle 1 in this case is attached to shafts 1 and 4. And in this one, treadle 2 is attached to shafts 3 and 4. Treadle 3 is 1 and 4 again, which is kind of an interesting decision. And then this one is shafts 1 and 2. If I were to change the tie-up, which I will in just a little bit, it will change the program. So I will get a different structure. This right here is our treadling. So if we push number 1, treadle 1, once again, we're always starting from that inside, moving outside, and it will lift shafts 1 and 4. And then that will continue to run through our drawdown, which shows the fabric structure. So if I push on treadle 1, I'm going to raise shafts 1 and 4. So that means wherever the warp thread is threaded in shafts 1 and 4 will be on the top of the fabric, so it will be peach. So let's see what that looks like. So if I go here, I see this is shaft 1 is lifted and it's pink. Now you have shafts 2 and 3, they're not lifted. Oh, so they're blue. So the weft is going over those 2 warp ends. Then I have this one, we're lifting shafts 1 and 4, and you can see that those are peach because they're lifted. And that's going to continue to run through that one pick. Now we're going to go into the next pick. We're going to lift, or we're going to push on treadle 2. Sorry, it's so hard for me to talk and think at the same time. That's going to lift 3 and 4. So when we look here, this blue is going over shafts 1 and 2 because those are not lifted, and then 3 and 4, those are peach because they are lifted, and then that's going to continue to go through the fabric. And that's sort of how we determine what the cloth will look like on the drawdown. So I went ahead and I changed my tie-up to represent this nice little diagonal line. In this tie-up, I have treadle 1 attached to shaft 1, treadle 2 attached to shaft 2, treadle 3 attached to shaft 3, and treadle 4 attached to shaft 4. This tie-up is called a direct tie-up, and the direct tie-up allows the weaver to push multiple treadles at once instead of just one treadle to create their sheds. It gives you full control over the total combination of sheds that you have on your loom. This kind of tie-up system is mostly used by people with older looms that might only have 4 treadles. Most 4-shaft looms will have at least 6 treadles, but the older styles, some of them only have 4. And it's also used by people with table looms, because table looms have little kind of like levers that will raise the shafts. So when you see this configuration, that is called a direct tie-up. On other computer software, you can put multiple black dots in every row to indicate how many treadles you're pushing at once. With the handweaving.net at this current moment, you don't have that capability. See, if I try to push 2, I could only put 1 treadle option on my lift plan. So depending on your brain and the way that it works, you might prefer to use another computer program such as iWeave that will allow you to design your patterns right here in your treadling and then just work with the straight draw. I prefer to work with the tie up as a rigid Heddle weaver because I can figure out which sheds I need to make in order to make the pattern, and then simply select the sheds. And then when I go to weave my project, I go, oh, okay, I'm just going to lift shaft 1, which will be my Heddle one. Okay, I can do that. And when I'm designing it, I don't have to constantly remember which sheds I'm trying to recreate. I hope that makes more sense as we go on. Okay, so I took that awesome straight draw draft and I converted it to a 2-shaft plain weave. So we can talk about how this would go onto a rigid Heddle loom, because I think it's easier to start very, very simple and then you could just add more complexity as you go. This is not going to cover everything about drafts. I'm not going to talk about threading 3 and 4 shaft drafts. This is going to mostly talk about using it to design plain weave patterns and how to add 1 or 2 pickup sticks to your plain weave patterns. So I turned this into a 2-shaft draft. This is why a lot of people say that the rigid Heddle is a 2-shaft loom, and it is not a 2-shaft loom. 2-shaft looms are 2-shaft looms. Rigid Heddles are totally different. But you can take this 2-shaft draft and you could put it onto a rigid Heddle loom. So you could say your rigid Heddle with 1 Heddle is, it has 2 shaft capabilities, but it doesn't totally have 2 shaft capabilities. It gets a little confusing, but we'll make it more clear as we go on. So here I have made my threading. So this is if this was a 2-shaft loom, this would go through the eye of shaft 1, through a Heddle of shaft 2, Heddle shaft 1, Heddle shaft 2, Heddle shaft 1. Our decision as rigid Heddle weavers is which shaft is going to be the eyes of our Heddle and which shaft is going to be the slots of our Heddle. So for ease and simplicity, because it could be either one, it doesn't matter. It will make the same structure down here no matter how you thread it. I am going to say for this set of instructions, shaft 1 is our eyes of our Heddle. Shaft 2 is going to be our slots. Here in our lift plan, this is showing us basically our sheds. And this is where hopefully I can make it make sense to you that whatever you put here is the shed configuration. So what is a shed? A shed is essentially what the order of your warp threads, which warp threads are up and which warp threads are down. That's your shed, right? I think I forgot where the term came from, something where it does actually relate to a shed, like your garden shed. It's like the covering of your shuttle as it goes in and out, but that could just be a myth. I am not sure. So if I look at my tie up, this shed right here is lifting my Heddle up. So my eye threads are above my slot threads. This shed right here is not lifting Heddle 2. What this shed or it's not lifting shaft 2 for us because we're not a shaft loom in that way. So we have to kind of rethink about it. How in the world do you bring your slot threads up? You could put a pickup stick and you could lift them. You could use a Heddle rod and you could tie every single slot thread to a Heddle rod and you could lift them. But what we're probably going to do, what most people do, almost everybody, is they take Heddle 1 and they lower it. So that's the translation of our 2 sheds. So now we have our threading right here. So we've programmed the loom to operate this threading. We have our shed sequences. So we have ways of obtaining those sheds, even if we have to translate them from a lift sequence to something different because we have different equipment. But we know how to make this shed happen. We know how to make that shed happen. Then this is essentially the program that we're running. We're saying, okay, we want to operate this shed number 1, then we want to operate the next shed number 2, this shed number 1, the next shed number 2. and so on and so forth. So if I wanted to, I could actually write it out longhand on the side and say, this is how I'm going to weave this. Raise heddle number 1, raise lower heddle number 1, raise head number 1, lower heddle number 1. All of that will create this draft. So that's what I mean, that the draft is just a way of visually communicating your weave structure. So you don't have to do this longhand list of instructions. You can just have the shorthand that will say it visually and very quickly and concisely. Of course, the other really great thing about drafts is that you can play with your colors. So if I wanted to add a third color, let's do something green. That looks like it's kind of nice. Now I can start to change my warp colors and my weft colors to get different color designs. So even with this plain weave, you have a lot of options for playing with different color variations, and then you could put that onto your loom, and you can design your work in that way. Okay, so I'm going to show you how I add a pickup stick to a floor loom draft. Since we know that this is shaft 1 and shaft 1 is the eyes, we can't touch these. So whatever is on this bottom row is going to stay on the bottom row. We are not going to mess with them. This right here, though, are slot threads, which means that we can essentially reorganize these slot threads into our other shafts by using pickup sticks. There are some caveats that make it different than a shaft loom. I'm going to show you what it would look like on this draft if I were to pick up every other slot thread. So let's say we lowered our heddle down, so we're only operating with these slot threads. So I wonder if you can visually see it. If we're looking down at our loom, these are the slot threads. We're not seeing these because they're down and they're sort of out of the way. And if I wanted to put every other one of these on a pickup stick, let's say I would go over this slot thread, and then I would go under this slot thread, and I'd pick it up. Going over this slot thread, I'm going under this slot thread, and I'm picking it up. Going over this slot thread, under this slot thread, and picking it up. So let's do that just for this little area right here to create. You can see it's already changing my drawdown, and I'm getting some floats with our weft. So the couple things are different with this than they are on a floor loom. So on a floor loom, when we do something like this, let's say we take our shaft 2 and we're maneuvering some of those warp ends that were in shaft 2 to shaft 3, it removes them from shaft 2. That doesn't happen with the rigid heddle. We are still operating. If you were to lower your heddle to create this shed, you can still weave the same sequence even though these are under a pickup stick. So that's something that does not occur on a shaft loom. So if this was a three shaft draft that we're putting on a shaft loom, it would weave up differently than using pickup sticks. So we're sort of creating a representation of how this would work, and we're configuring it to work within the shaft loom system. And the way we fix that is through here, our tie-up, because our tie-up, remember, is a collection of sheds. So that means that here, if I were to lift shaft 2, notice how it would lift everything except for the pickup sticks. So this is actually a shed that would not exist on a rigid heddle loom. In order to bring this back to what it was, we need to add shafts 2 and 3. And now we have our same shed configuration. This is lifting our heddle and lowering our heddle, lifting our heddle and lowering a heddle. We're still able to have plain weave. So that's one way that we fix this kind of subtractive process that we cannot do on a rigid heddle loom. But we still need to be able to talk about lifting just our pickup stick, because that's something we can do. We can, once threads are on a pickup stick, we can either raise those threads with shaft 1, or we can lift them on our own. So let's add that to our tie-up. So we can raise Heddle 1, and then we can add the pickup stick. And that's how we're going to represent that within our tie-up. The next one is we can simply lift our Heddle, our pickup stick. So have everything in neutral and raise the pickup stick, and that's going to give you that configuration. So that's how we show that in the tie-up. Now to design, all I have to do is tell it which shed I want to run in my program. Whoa, let's do that. Okay, so here we go. I have, this is raising Heddle 1. This one is lowering Heddle 1, so I'm exposing the slot threads and the pickup stick. This one is raising Heddle 1 and the pickup stick to create some warp floats. Now let's say if I wanted to create weft floats, you could see that there's a problem. If I were to lift just a pickup stick, I would have this huge float right here. So if I wanted to do a pattern where I was lifting the pickup stick on its own, I would have to continue this whole process and lift every other one, just to keep me from having so many floats. So that's sort of the limitation with pickup sticks, but it's also, I don't know, brings a lot of fun variation to your weaving as well. So I'm back to the beginning with a plain weave draft. I am going to take the instructions for the first weft float structure from Betty Lynn Davenport's Textures and Patterns for the Rigid Huddle Loom, and I'm going to put it into a draft. So this one is called 3-1 lace, and the pattern stick positioning, so this would be our pickup stick, is 1 up and 1 down, repeat across. So this is for the slot threads only. Remember, we're not touching those whole threads that are Heddle. So we're lowering our Heddle, and then we're exposing this, or shaft 2. And then it's 1 up and 1 down. So this one is going onto the pattern stick, this one's not. This one's going onto the pattern stick, this one's not. And then we keep doing that all the way across. Okay, and we're going to add, because this is lifting our Heddle and this is lowering our Heddle, which is essentially exposing both shafts 2 and 3, because that's our slot threads and pickup sticks. Now we're back to a plain weave. Okay, so let's go ahead and add our other shed options. We can just lift the pickup stick, or we could lift the pickup stick with our Heddle raised. So those are our 4 sheds that we have that are possible with this draft with the pickup stick. So her instructions say the first thing you're going to do is lift your Heddle, which is what we would consider treadle 1 right here. So we've got that. The next one is the pattern stick, which is just lifting the pattern stick right there. So that's that 3rd box over. And then we're going to go up again. We have that, and then we have down. So this right here represents our Heddle down with the slot thread and pattern stick exposed. So then we do that again. So Heddle 1 up, pattern stick, Heddle 1 up, Heddle 1, or Heddle 1 down, Heddle 1 up, pattern stick, Heddle 1 up, Heddle 1 down. Is that right? Yeah. Heddle 1, oh wait, no, I messed up. There we go. So 1 up, up, down, up, pattern stick, up, down, up, pattern stick, up, down, pattern stick, up, down, up, pattern stick, up, down, pattern stick, up, down, up, stick. There's easier ways of doing this, like copying and pasting, but okay, there we go. So that is what that looks like as a draft. This is what it looks like when it's woven in her sample. And now that we have it though as a draft, we could start playing with the colors. Like let's say if I wanted these floats to be green, I can do it this way. So it gives me a little bit more control over my final product because I can start to see what I have in my stash, and I can start to play with different colors with my floats, which is super, super fun. And then I can take it and I can look at the opposite side and see how these floats are going to look a little different. So let me take, let's see here, I want that one green, that one green, that one green. And let's do this one dark green. I'm so curious what this is going to look like on the other side. Let's see that one. Okay, so there's one side. Let's look at it on the opposite side. It looks like that. So you can see that you can start to have a lot of fun. And now when I go to thread this, I'm going to have to remember that both shafts 2 and 3 are my slot threads, but I'm going to have to put these little single colors in when I do my direct warping, which could be a little bit complicated to figure out, but I think it's worth it. But this is a pattern that you maybe would not do intuitively because of those single eds. You know, we're rigid Heddle weavers, we like to work in our pairs. But maybe I'm looking at this, I'm like, wow, that's a really cool and interesting pattern, so maybe it's worth it. So that is how I put single pickup pattern designs into a draft so I can play with the colors. Once again, there's certain things that I can't see from the draft. I won't really know how the final drape of the fabric will be, and I also don't know what will happen with all the deflection from those floats. And I'll probably end up with a more lacy fabric with like little holes in it, so I'm not sure if I'm going to get this nice stripe effect that you see, but you know, who knows? Maybe I will. I also find that the adding the second pickup stick can get incredibly complicated very, very fast. So I am not going to cover that. This is just for one pickup stick. If you want to get into more complicated pickup stick patterns, then using the software that is made by Not So Rigid Weaver. So I'll link to that in the thing below too. All right, I think that's it. We're gonna do it. That was a lot. Thanks for following me. If you followed this far, and I hope you learned something, and I hope you go and join handweaving.net. Look at all of their amazing drafts because it's so fun. And I do teach classes on how to thread 3 shaft drafts through the Rigid Heddle Academy. So anything, let's go look at their 3 shaft drafts. Oh, I'm not gonna save that. Let me search for drafts. I always do like the most liked drafts and maximum of 3 shafts. There we go. So you could see, well, some of these things we can't technically do. See those huge floats. Let's max float. We'll say 4. 4 is our max float. There we go. So you could see just how many things you can do with just 3 shafts, which is really, really cool. So, and that's only 2 Heddles. So this is a really fun thing to master, and I hope you do, because it will open up so many things you could do with your rigid Heddle loom. It's so fun. And it challenges your brain in this really tingly way that makes your brain kind of buzz. All right, that's it. Have a great day. Bye.